This novel tells the story of a protagonist who is reborn amidst court politics and family strife, using memories from a past life to alter his destiny and find true love and freedom amidst complex emotional entanglements. The narrative spans life and death, love and hate, and the struggle for power, revealing the brilliance and darkness of human nature. In this ancient empire filled with intrigue and power plays, a protagonist embarks on a journey to change his fate after being reborn. Utilizing memories from a previous life, he navigates through courtly struggles and family disputes, seeking his own path amidst love and being loved. Drawing strength from tragedy, the protagonist explores the meaning of true love while pursuing freedom. Subscribe to our channel to uncover the secrets hidden deep within the court, and follow the protagonist's steps in an epic adventure about rebirth, love, and self-discovery. When I awoke that morning before the rising sun in the east, I had a sudden realization today was the day I would meet my future husband. Only in this life, he would remain little more to me than my prince and my emperor. I had decided long ago, after I had found myself reborn in the same life, that I would not follow the path that led to my untimely death, that I would live this life for myself, even if that meant leaving the side of the man I loved. Don't get me wrong, it was a one-sided love. My prince would have never loved a man, would never have married a man nor bed a man were it not for the clever schemes of my stepmother and older sister. But even they were not to blame for me falling so hopelessly in love with him. In our empire, a prince had a series of consorts and even more concubines, but just one princess wife. And that wife would be my sister Lin, born of the main wife of my father, who was the prime minister of the right. Lin, and who was the only legitimate child in residence. She happened to be born just a year before me, my older sister. But a bride was expected to bring in dowry consort, who would act as both servants and bedwarmers to their husband. Should a dowry consort fall pregnant, she could even expect to be placed amongst the concubines. Thus, families often sent in cousins and concubine daughters to strengthen the position of the legal wife or consort. Our family had concubine daughters, and they were very beautiful. But mother feared that they would detract from the loveliness that was her daughter, and that they might rise beyond their position and capture the prince's heart. She need not have worried so. My sister fell pregnant with the prince's son on her wedding night, securing her position in his household. Whether that child became the crown prince or one of the consort's sons took the position, I would never know, as I died the night before my husband prince would become my husband emperor. It mattered not now, not anymore. I planned to take my own fate in my own hands and not leave it to my family due to some filial piety or duty. Not that I was being filial really in my last life. I was not a very bright child, drifting without aim or purpose as the fourth son and waste child, and was guided into the marriage without understanding of what it all meant. It could not really be helped. I was born of a maid, not even a concubine. I was probably only accepted into my father's house as I was male. For all my stepmother's scheming, she herself could not birth a second child, so had to watch as the concubines gave father sons and daughters. My own mother died in childbirth, and I was born weak and sickly. I'm certain my fate would have died along with her, had it not been for mother claiming me, wishing to raise me, another pawn upon her chessboard. A pity things refused to work out the way she planned. The tutors she lavished upon me were impatient men, brilliant in their fields, yet with lack of understanding when it came to a small child whose intelligence was not even average. They dismissed me as waste without giving me a chance to learn anything. Because I could not hold a brush well, I must be unable to ever write. Because it took me time to recognize the words before me, I could never read. And so mother gave up and I became useless to her. I was looked down upon with scorn, not only by my siblings and their concubine mothers, but by the servants as well. Father simply ignored me, as did mother for the most part. I was pretty much left to my own devices. Drifting through life didn't feel so bad to me. It was as if life was a hazy dream. Both the good and the bad, and I had little attachment to it, but did have a fondness for nature, and would disappear for long walks whenever the guards' backs were turned, which for me was often. The house would be unlikely to ever bother look for me should I disappear forever. Unfortunately for them, I always managed to wander back. I would not be doing so this time, though. I thought with a slight smile on my lips as I dressed myself within my tiny room, readying myself for my final outing on this day. In my last life, I met him. My future husband and I plan to do so in this life as well, because on this day, my beloved prince almost lost his life, to be honest. Even if he had not met me, I believe he would have pulled through. All I had managed to do that last time was to drag him from the sudden downpour that descended from the heavens after I found him, into an old abandoned house in the woods. I knew of this place well. I had used it as my shelter through rain and the unlit night more than once. If it was not so close to my ancestral home, I would likely have just moved here once reborn, despite my small size and away from mother's reach. But I could not risk them finding me, and I still felt I owed my prince this one last thing. I loved the woods. The air was fresh and filled with scents that could not be found within a bottle or burned as incense, and they changed with every season. In spring, the floral scent of blossoms and fresh leaves and grass permeated the air, and in the summer, those scents were crushed beneath the heavy scent of the hot sun beaming on rotting logs or animal waste, dusty hazy, and the autumn brought a fresher scent of decay and rich soil as leaves tumbled down from the branches onto earth that had finally seen rain. And in the winter, the smells were as crisp as the biting cold air. Yet today, this day in spring, tainting the flower-tinted air, was the scent of blood. I never knew how he came to be there. I didn't even know originally that he was the prince, let alone that he would become my master and husband. All I knew was that he was a wounded man. There was blood staining his side, and it had begun to rain. It was safe to assume he was ambushed or met bandits on the road, for the wound seemed to be made by a blade of sorts. I thought now as I was ignored by the house. My meals tended to be plain and not very filling. I was quite a weak child. How I managed to move a grown man to that abandoned house, I could not say in this life. I was a little stronger, having filled my belly with the harvest of the woods, storing chestnuts and wild onions in a chest beside my bed to help supplement my poor diet through the winter, and consuming herbs that I grew surreptitiously over the years to improve my health. But dragging him to that house remained a chore, as I knew what would happen. I had already stored away blankets and medicines in that house, waiting for this day, the day I would repay my prince for his kindness. In that last life, the shelter was all I offered, as I could not even start a fire. So useless had I become. He suffered a fever, which I did not know how to break, a bloody wound that I did not know how to wrap. All I could do was bring a blanket and cloth from the main house to keep him warm and wash away the dirt and blood. And when I went to get food on the fourth day after meeting him, he disappeared from the house, and I would not meet him again for 2 years, until the day of the wedding. This time, with the knowledge gained in the palace from the last life, I could treat him better, before our paths split for good. Never to again diverge, never to marry. Marrying into the palace did not frighten me. I was naive. I thought I was just to be a confidant and servant to my sister until she secured her place. I never expected that 3 months after the wedding, after it was confirmed that my sister carried his child, that he would stumble drunk into my room and force himself onto me. I cried and begged him to stop. It hurt so much, but he didn't. I didn't understand what was happening or why he would do this. He told me to shut up, that I was his by right of my sister's marriage to him, and continued with his business on top of me. I fainted halfway through, unable to cope with it any longer. I found out from a maid that I had suffered from an extensive fever in the aftermath, and that he had sent for doctors to see to my health. This act of kindness made his servants see me in a slightly different light, even though my sister's servants still treated me with scorn. It was probably this act of kindness as well that paved the way for my heart to fall. That seems foolish, does it not? That I would eventually fall in love with the man that forced himself on me, stealing away my virginity in such a brutal manner. But as a doctor had not been called for me by my ancestral family since the time that I had failed to live up to mother's expectations, is it any wonder that I felt the stirrings of forgiveness? Of course, it did not stop me from shaking with fear when he entered my room a couple of months later for the second time. He was not drunk this time, and he did not apologize with words for his actions that last time. In fact, he did not say anything at all as he stilled my trembling body with gentle touches. how he taught me to react to his fingers, how he made me learn that marital relations could indeed be pleasurable. In hindsight, I wonder now if this was his way of apologizing to me, teaching me that he was not truly a monster. Either way, it forged another bond between us. In my heart, at least, he left my room as I slept, exhausted, and I did not see him again for a week. Our next meeting would be an accidental encounter in the gardens. I could no longer disappear into the woods that had been stolen from me by this marriage, and I was locked inside the inner palace. No worse. I was locked inside my sister's palace, for even were I a dowry consort, I was still a man. Interacting with the concubines was something forbidden for me. So my only solace became the gardens of the princess consort palace. They were generous, though, but they were too tame for my liking, and I was quickly becoming restless. But there was nothing for me to spin my frustrations upon. I could not play an instrument, nor could I practice calligraphy. My reading ability was so poor only commoners could compare. My weak body meant that martial arts were completely out of the question. The only thing I apparently could do at that time was to curl into a ball and cry. Perhaps my prince was feeling benevolent that day, for when he passed through the gardens to see how his princess was feeling as her morning sickness had yet to pass, he knelt beside me and asked me what was wrong. "I want to go home," I wailed pitifully, still too innocent and naive to truly understand clearly my situation. As I mentioned before, I was not very bright at all. "I want to walk through the woods and play in the river. But the guards won't let me leave here," he chuckled, actually laughed at me, not angry at all by my stupidity and careless words. He pulled me to my feet and wiped away my tears. "Silly boy," he said, "do you not understand how much of an honor it is to serve me as my bed warmer?" "No," I replied stupidly, but he just laughed some more. "Go to your room," he instructed. "Wait for me there." After he visited my sister, he came to me and made me cry for completely different reasons. He came to understand that I was bored, and though he did not have to deal with the pitiful me, he assigned a eunuch to become a tutor to me, to teach me to read and to write. That eunuch was an older man and had much patience for the useless me, allowing me the time I needed to absorb his lessons, and slowly, the 16-year-old me finally learned how to read, learned how to write, and as if a key had been turned a lock within my head, my thirst for knowledge became insatiable. There were several times over the next few years that he would come to my bed, please himself with my body, then listen to me as I spoke of books I had read, of poems that had moved me, and of things that I had learned. And then the emperor fell ill. A crown prince had not been assigned to either of his two sons. My prince was actually the younger of the only two princes born this generation. There were ministers who favored the firstborn prince's heir, and there were ministers who favored the second-born prince's heir. I had met the first prince when he visited his brother to meet my prince's newest son, born of my sister, as my sister's attendant. I happened to be close by, lingering in the shadows with the other servants. I can't say what I thought of him then, as my education was still too shallow at that time. But if memory serves well, he came across arrogant. But his barbs were shallow and not eloquently hidden. My sister was much more glib. He could not once sense the poison in her words. I am sure she impressed our husband that day, regardless of how clever or witty he was or was not. I cannot deny that there was much fervor during the emperor's final days, the race for the throne harsh and evident. But I was a mere bed warmer. I could do nothing for my prince but lie beneath him when he wished to take his frustrations out on me. I had no true backing, and I was a man. I would not break if his actions became too forceful or too brutal. I could satisfy and relieve him in a way that his fair consorts could not. I cannot say that it didn't hurt sometimes. I cannot say that all my tears were shed in pleasure. But I loved him so much by that time, and just wanted to be useful for him. In the end, my sacrifice and his worries were all for naught. The royal family had had trouble with fertility for centuries, and so the emperor's harem was always large, hoping to find women able to carry their seed to term and produce healthy sons. The first prince was the first son born to an emperor's princess consort for generations, thus securing her as the empress, and so everyone assumed this heaven-sent prince was fated to become the emperor. And why not? The prince had such a prominent background, being the grandchild of a former prime minister of the left and the nephew of the current one. My prince's background was not any less impressive. His grandfather was a great and powerful general and had been in charge of the armies of the north for most of his life. It wasn't certain if his first son would take the reins, though that man's sons were all serving in the military. But his second daughter had wed the son of the former general of the armies of the West. My prince's military background was just this amazing. However, even if this was so, the generals of the East and South were leaning towards favoring the first prince. But the first prince revealed a flaw that could not really be overlooked in the end. The duty of the harem was to produce sons in order to secure the imperial line. But while my prince's wives had faithfully produced 5 sons between them and 3 were in perfect health, the first prince's harem had produced only 5 daughters. And then the 6th one was born in the end, with my prince revealing more wit and intelligence than his older brother, more mettle and cruelty, more prudence and patience, and most definitely more sons. There was little contest in the end. My prince was declared the crown prince and would formally succeed his father on the 100th day of his death. But I would not see his crowning. I died on the 99th day. My sister was the princess consort and had produced a son and a daughter. This should have paved her way for the position of empress, but she remained ever filled with doubts, as she declared while she had tea served for us in the courtyard of her palace. There was competition from a secondary consort, who had borne the prince's first son, and from a favored concubine who had given birth to 2 sons. Though one of the boys was a little sickly, I listened to her complaints as I drank my tea, and then, she added as she stirred the tea in her cup, it was not unknown in ages past for an emperor to crown a man his empress. But sister, I said, still so trusting and naive, there are no formal male concubines in the prince's harem. Indeed, I was still just a dowry consort, just a bed warmer and attendant of the princess consort. I still lived in her palace, as they say. Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer, I suppose. I coughed up blood a few moments later, and her maids came to my side, not to care for me, but just to ensure I did not puke red essence upon her floor. In my dying moments, I had an epiphany. I became bright enough to realize that I was poisoned and wise enough to know who was the culprit. Indeed, she said it herself, no. There are no formal male concubines, but there is a man who has been considered amongst the harem as favored by the prince. I see, I replied as I shook my head and chuckled, closing my eyes as I accepted the inevitable. I didn't understand why she worried about me, though. I loved my prince, but he did not love me, no more than he loved any of the women in the harem. We were his tools to use. We were not there to be loved. I expected to die, to visit the Yellow River, and drink the waters of forgetfulness so that I could live anew. Perhaps that life would be a little kinder than this one. Only that did not happen. I woke to find myself in my 8-year-old body, a few months after I had been deemed unteachable. As my memories clashed with those that I had forgotten, I came to understand that I had just awoken from a fever. So was all I dreamed real? Did I truly come to meet the prince, my husband, to live and to learn in the palace? I was muddled for a few days, until I overheard the maids gossiping about the betrothal secured for my sister by my father to the second prince. I had indeed returned to my old life. Many would seek to change their lot in life, to seek revenge for their hurts and their grievances. But I knew that would not resolve anything. My prince would still need a princess consort, dowry consorts, and sons. Me changing the fate of my family by causing their downfall would not change this fact. If anything, it would just bring my death forward. And though I had knowledge now, and could be the son mother wished me to be, I also was wise enough to know that if I wanted freedom in this life, I could not allow my fate to be dictated by her. It was enough that I had followed her bidding in the last life. I did not feel I owed her anything in this one, so I quietly bided my time. I reacquainted myself with the woods outside my ancestral home. I enjoyed my newfound freedom away from the gilded cage of the palace. And this time I had my knowledge of the plants, the habitats of animals and bugs, of basic herbal medicines and remedies, and I had the opportunity to gain more. Stealing into my father's library while the house slept to absorb it all. And that brought me back to the day I met him once more, the man I loved. I cleaned and treated his wounds with deft hands. Using a salve I had made myself, I wiped clean the sweat of his body, burning every line of it to memory as after this day. That is all I would have left of him. I boiled tea and let it cool to quench his thirst and made a nutritious soup to fill his belly as his fever raged. The burning heat of his body broke much more easily this time around, and I readied myself to leave him before he came around. But before I left, I stole a last kiss from his slightly chapped lips. "I'm sorry, my prince," I whispered and hoped vainly that he would hear me within his dreams. "I cannot be by your side in this life. But I know you are a great man, and I am sure you will be a great emperor. I love you. You will ever remain my husband in my heart. If not in reality, goodbye." That day passed now 8 years ago. 8 long years since I escaped from my family to become a healer in this remote village. My prince will be crowned emperor tomorrow, and although I wish to see him, I thought it would be best if I stayed away. That way, my resolve will not falter, and I will not foolishly throw myself at the steps of the palace and beg him to take me back. I'm sure he would be disgusted if I did so. I heard that my sister is sickly. She never recovered from the birth of her second child. But then, I was not by her side as the doctor fed her medicine, so who knows what she consumed this time. I fear her dreams of becoming empress are at an end. However, for my prince requires someone strong beside him, someone who can keep peace amongst his wives and produce more sons. The consort that Lennon saw as her rival is the most likely candidate. As for my family, well, their fate is their daughter's fate. They cannot continue to preen as peacocks when their phoenix cannot fly in the heavens. They can only look on as another takes her place. So one could say that neither the Prime Minister of the right nor the Prime Minister of the left have the ear of the emperor in this life. My own life is peaceful. Not quite as free as I would have liked, as villager mothers see me as a potential husband for their daughters. But I do not wish for a bride nor children. My heart is still with my husband. I miss him, and I always will, of course. No one knows what tomorrow will bring, not I for one. For today is the 99th day since the death of the previous emperor. The day I died in my last life, so tomorrow, I will truly be reborn, reincarnated as Wang Fei once more. Author's note: please understand that this is not another chapter of Reborn to Live Without You. This is a different short story that came to mind while I was reading Tyrannical Wang's beloved wife. I copied and pasted that, hence the capitals. It's not exactly how I imagined it actually, but I like how it turned out, so read it. Don't read it. But please don't be disappointed that it's not related to the former before giving it a chance. I really don't intend to make these short stories any longer than they are. Despite their endings not necessarily being what you want, you've disgraced your parents, disgraced your grandparents, disgraced all of the ancestors to our family. You've left me with only one option. You will be cast out. Your name will no longer be Chong. You will be forever, and to the end of time, removed from the family records. This family no longer has a Chong Xiaoying. Now get out of my sight. But father, what about the royal engagement with Jun Qinhuang? Is there only one Ger in this family? Xiaomin is near his age, just promote him. 200 years ago, an emperor who had too many excellent sons was troubled, unable to choose an heir normally. It would be the son of his empress that would be named his successor. However, that man had been raised into a wastrel by his doting mother and aptly removed himself from the line of succession. Although it was written in the official records that Zhong Qinhuang lost his life to a sudden illness, he actually died in the arms of a favored concubine, sent to his grave by a heavy and mixed indulgence of lust, alcohol, and food. The morning that followed his funeral was only upon the surface. The 9 princes that had been suppressed by the empress and her family began to make plans to replace him in their imperial father's eyes. The empress naturally would not pave the way for these sons of concubines, unwilling to allow them what should have been her son's inheritance so easily. Thus, when the emperor came to her, still uncertain of whom to promote, she was careful with her words, balancing both compliment with critic and not placing one prince before the other. Her personal mama gladly played along, having helped raise the former crown prince into his foolish self, and not letting blame stick to her mistress nor herself preferred to make things difficult for others. So she suggested that as a worshipper of Taoism, could not a priest who was blessed with the secrets of the stars not divine for the emperor and aid him in his dilemma. The emperor found this a wonderful solution and sought out a diviner, not knowing that this man had been bribed heavily with silver and gold. I was a naive child when I first learned that I was to be wed to the seventh prince, Jun Qinhuang, when I came of age at the time. This did not mean that much to me, for I was a ger. I knew, just as every ger and every girl, that there would come a time that I would marry into another family and have a husband to serve and a mother-in-law to cater to. I could not remain in my maternal family forever. I would have his children, raise them into good sons and daughters, and they in turn would wed. "I'm sorry, Your Highness." The doctor turned to face my husband, whose usually stoic expression had an edge of ice to it. "The child has been lost. There is nothing I can do." The seventh prince flung his long sleeves and left me to my suffering, lying in a bed now soaked in blood. I did not shed a tear for his departure, nor that of my unborn baby. The first time this occurred, I cried pitifully for the lost life and for myself. Imperial concubine mother was quite kind at that time, sending medicine and tonics. This time she was heartless, blaming me for being careless, even forcing me to kneel before her palace. Not yet recuperated and already quite weak, I fell unconscious still kneeling and almost lost my own life right there. The imperial concubine was chastised by the empress for being inconsiderate, only causing the woman to hate me that much more. Hated for being a ger. Hated for being a son-in-law rather than a daughter-in-law. Hated due to losing the child that might have finally secured her son the throne. The diviner had suggested that the prince who could have a ger bear his male son was fated by the heavens to be a dragon. Although ger are able to bear children just as women, we are not women. Our fertility is weak, and we would truly be considered blessed to quicken a child in our wombs. If every prince must have a princess consort who was a ger, then they would truly be blessed to bear offspring of the legitimate line. This test was both wicked and ingenious. The race to the throne now seemed to rely on the luck of the heavens. In truth, it was not so simple as I mentioned. I am a ger, not a woman, and just as not every man favors a woman with large hips or gentle demeanor, not every man would want to favor a ger. Even more complex was the fact that a prince did not just have one wife. There were also his 2 secondary wives, his 4 consorts, and then 8 concubines. Actually, they were all concubines, just of differing ranks, and none of these included Tong Fong, servant girls who warmed their master's bed, but were not officially part of his harem. This mess of ger and women the main wife is naturally supposed to both organize and control in order that the prince's backyard be a peaceful place for him to visit. But any peace in a prince or official's backyard is an illusion. My prince had already married his 4 consorts and had 6 concubines before I was carried in an 8-person sedan into his palace. All of his concubines were women. When he came to remove the veil that covered my pale face, he did so with some hesitation, and he left a heartbeat following. I barely caught a glimpse of his hard, gem-like eyes and square jaw in that moment. Not a word was exchanged with me still. He had ambition, and he was not about to let the fact that despite my naturally ambiguous appearance, I still had more similarities to his royal body than that of his other wives stop him from consummating the marriage. I could smell the alcohol on his breath as he approached me that night, tearing off my red wedding gown before turning me over, perhaps hoping to pretend that I was actually female as he violated me. There was so much pain. My mother had told me that both ger and maidens would feel pain upon their first night, but I did not expect it to be so bad that I felt as if my rear was torn in 2 by him. When I was roused the next morning by the servants, the pain had not subsided much. It felt as if a foreign object was still buried in that unable-to-be-named place, still tearing my insides with blazing heat. My pelvis was sore. My back ached, and there was a tender place at the back of my head where he had pulled at my hair. Angry that I was crying beneath him, and in this agonizing state, I was expected to rise and help my prince with his morning ablutions. He shoved me away, rejecting me in favor of his servants. I did not stop him, I simply acquiesced. I was his wife now. It was my duty to listen to him, as stated in the Analects of Women and Ger. On the first morning of our marriage, I was expected to serve tea to the empress and the imperial concubine, who was 7th prince's birth mother. The burning sensation within my body seemed to worsen during every moment as the empress' sharp tongue was bitter while the imperial concubine was sweet. My marriage had been consummated. Naturally, one was unhappy while the other was pleased. Dizzily, I somehow made it through the painful morning before collapsing in the carriage, the fever rushing through my person and sweat coating my skin. The prince had no choice but to call an imperial doctor to heal me if I died. He would lose his chance for the throne completely. I do not know if the imperial doctor taught my husband a lesson, but when he chose to have me serve him in the future, his actions were not as brutal as that painful night. The fever itself broke the following evening. On the third day, my prince accompanied me home and put on a show worthy of a royal personage, showing kindness and caring towards me and none of the indifference and silence that was all I was given in his palace. I did not spoil his ruse. My mother had already been unwilling to have me married into the imperial family, and were it not for the decree, she would never have allowed me to do so. I did not wish to break her heart all over again and let her believe as she wished. My life within my prince's palace settled into a pattern. At first his other concubines would show obeisance to me, while quietly probing the limits of my ability. I would work on the household accounts with the relevant servants, and on the 1st and the 15th of every month, I would serve my husband. The unpleasantness of the wedding and subsequent night was not forgotten, but all in all, my marriage could not be considered a bad one, even if it was not filled with love nor happiness. The prince had an expectation of me, and so long as I fulfilled my duties, he would not allow others in his house to slight me, be they his servants or his concubines. I was his Wang Fei. He made this clear to everyone. It did not completely stop the petty remarks and small tricks, but the concubines could not be totally dissatisfied, for at least our husband did not favor any one of us over any other. This changed shortly after the imperial doctor took my pulse and declared that I had finally fallen pregnant with the prince's child. Imperial concubine mother was ecstatic. It had taken me 3 long years to fall, but I had managed to do so. Unlike the consorts of the other 8 princes, it should be known that we all were wed within a few months of each other. All of the auspicious days were taken by us in those months, as each one of the weddings were performed, one after the other. Thus none of us were in a particularly more advantageous position than the other. Plus there was no miracle marking upon our bodies to say which had a better chance to fall pregnant than which other. All spouses all had similar backgrounds, not born of the highest officials either. My father was of 3rd rank, as was 4th, 5th and 9th's father-in-laws. The others had father-in-laws of 4th rank. None of our families had the strength to push their prince by marriage onto the throne by force. Perhaps my fertility was simply better, or my luck. If it were luck, then it could be said that the 3rd princess consort had the worst luck. He died 2 months after the wedding, and it suspiciously seemed that 3rd prince had a hand in the boy's death. It was then the other princes learned of their fate should their spouse die. The throne would be forever out of their reach. My prince was well aware of this, which was why each 1st and 15th he came to me, turning me over to hide my lack of breast, my masculine genitalia and face before preparing me for his favor. It was not painful as it was that first night, but I didn't like serving him either. I always felt somewhat dirty and used afterwards, so falling pregnant was both a joy to me and a relief. He would naturally leave me alone now I was carrying his heir, and perhaps as well after I birthed him. And I was right, the concubines were also glad, thinking that the little attention they received would now increase. That hope was in vain. 6 weeks after my pregnancy was confirmed, Wang Yi had carried home a new wife. She was a bright and vivid woman and clearly in love with my husband, just as he seemed to hold an affection for her. He ordered that the 2nd largest courtyard in the backyard be cleaned and given to her as I prepared for the marriage, and told me she would be his secondary wife. Thus her monthly allowance of silver, her clothing allowance, and such should be more than the other concubines. He also had a kitchen installed in that courtyard. Also, they pushed the confines of the rules, and she married in wearing a deep pink dress that bordered on being red, and while her sedan was carried only by 6, it was ostentatious by itself. I swear, were it not against the rules, she would have been carried through the main gate. This favoritism was made more clear when I was told that the woman, now feng shui, did not have to come and pay her respects to me. As a further smack in my face, the imperial doctor declared that she was pregnant just 1 month later. How did that not seem questionable? Had my husband been unfaithful prior to their marriage? Were he not so faithful to the rules and expectations as a contender for the throne? Others would most assuredly consider this true. Instead, they believed it a coincidence and lucky fate. What luck! I thought as I bled out onto the bed just a week following the announcement. My poor son lost to whatever poison I had consumed. The imperial doctor confirmed that I had digested something dirty, and a scapegoat was found, one of the lesser concubines. I did not believe it was her, however. We had had our minor scraps with bitter words, but she had never once tried to harm me. Plus, why now? Why not when I was more vulnerable and in an earlier month of pregnancy? However, my husband was clearly satisfied with the results of the investigation, and the girl lost her life. Perhaps it was karma, but that woman also did not keep her child, miscarrying naturally a few days later. She was duly compensated with the care of our husband and treasures from our vaults, while I bitterly had to remain silent and carry on as if nothing had happened at all. By some luck and fortune, I became pregnant 6 months later. In this time, 2 other girls had fallen pregnant, but their fates were not fortunate either. One girl was pushed into a lake by a servant and lost the fetus, while the other gave birth to a dead child and lost their own life in the process. It truly was a bitter existence being a princess consort girl. This time Wang Yi was much more cautious, having me remain in bed while the child settled in my womb and having his own most loyal mama make sure I ate clean food and drank clean water. Even more, he gave all of my household responsibilities to feng shui, so I not be stressed by my duties. What stress? Checking the accounts of our businesses, calculating the expenditure for clothing, jewelry, and allowances, organizing the servants into the best positions to make use of their skills and abilities. Those sorts of things had always kept me going, kept me sane, kept me feeling as if I had a use, and he took that away from me. Now I was just a vessel for his heirs still. I really tried to keep that little life, but apparently, one of the third-rank maid servants went insane with jealousy, having failed to climb into my husband's bed, so snuck into my room to beat my child from me. A third-rank maid had a fair bit more strength than a girl raised in a boudoir, and I had been asleep. But did no one think to ask the question of how she managed to get into my room in the first place? Did anyone not wonder why she did not cry out in pain as she was beaten to death as punishment for her crime, but continued to struggle and growl like a beast? And why beat me and not the very favored feng shui? Wang Yi. The woman had kneeled down before our husband after the doctor confirmed my loss, as if the red staining my inner thighs was not proof enough. Punish me, it's my fault. I did not control the servants well, of course. She was not punished. How could he bear to harm the one he loved? She even kept her power over the palace after I was well enough to resume my duties, unwilling to relinquish it, and of course, the prince supported her. Your only duty is clear, he declared to me when I mentioned my position as Wang Fei. To bear my heir, that is your role. Forget about anything else. So this Wang Fei in name only truly began one's days of suffering. Had they not been hard before? Imperial concubine mother slowly became desperate in the following years. 8th Princess consort had borne a child after 6 years of marriage. It had been a girl, not a male, so the race for the throne had not ended. But we wives had been married in for now many years, and were considered to be near to the end of our prime childbearing years. My prince was also expressing his urgency. He now made me serve him at least once a week, if not more, and had an imperial doctor move into an outer courtyard of the palace. I had bitter tonics to consume every day. I had the doctor check on my health every week. My diet and exercise were regulated as well. This attention did not sit well with feng shui. She had borne the prince both a daughter and a son, but these children were not considered as important as the prince's heir, and that made whatever relationship she had with our husband strained. Not that she could do much to vent to him in the circumstances, only that my allowance was secretly halved. The lack blamed on thieving servants. Plus, she would flaunt her son in front of me and the concubines every few days. Those women loathed her. for none of them had been able to conceive since she came into the palace. One secretly snuck in a physician only to be told that she was infertile. Shi Laoshi, the mother of the prince's second daughter, could no longer bear children. She quickly figured out just who was to blame. But what could she do? What could any of us do? Feng Shi held our husband's heart. But even if he indulged her, there was still one thing he placed before her: the emperor's throne. The emperor was getting old, and with his sons failing to bring forth heirs was growing increasingly worried, and there were doubts increasing in his head about the diviner's words. His officials were even calling him to renounce his edict of 7 years and name a successor. Naturally, they sought to promote their own favorite princes. The left prime minister was especially loud. His daughter had married fourth prince as a secondary wife. He believed that the now infertile consort, for he had been the one to lose his child in the icy cold of the lake, would never be raised above his daughter as empress should the fourth prince become emperor. But badgering the old emperor simply caused him to be more stubborn and silenced the doubts of his original decision. He would give it 3 more years. If none the remaining consorts could not provide him a legal grandchild by their 25th birthday, he would reconsider then. Now 7th prince entered my room almost every night, forcing my body's endurance as he poured his seed into it to quicken. I became increasingly numb to my position as a vessel. Feng Shi came to taunt me every day, unhappy that our husband never came to her bed anymore, unhappy that he did not pay her children much attention anymore. If I could summon any emotion, I would have sneered at her. After all, this was what she had brought upon me, upon herself. If she had just left me and my children alone, none of this would have happened, and she would still be secure in our husband's love. Finally, 10 months before my 25th birthday, I fell pregnant for the 3rd time. When Wang Yi found out, he came to my room, grasped my hand, and whispered, "Well done." I could only stare at him with a slack jaw. Never before had a word of praise slipped from his lips in favor of me. Were it 7, 6, or even 4 years ago, I might have even been moved. But I had nothing left in me now. He didn't return to sleep with me that night. But strangely enough, he did not go and lie with Feng Shi either. The maids were filled with gossip. So naturally it came to my ears that Feng Shi was no longer favored. Perhaps her persistence and pestering had finally worn the prince's affections too thin. Well, it was obvious that she wanted her son to be his heir. I even heard rumors once that she had tried to convince 7th prince to lie and claim I had given birth to him. Pillow talk can be influential, but only truly worked if it was what the man wanted to hear, or if his mind was too useless to think for himself. 7th prince knew that it would only take one loose tongue to slip and affect his right to the throne by allowing such a lie. And besides, the little prince resembled his mother as a baby and looked nothing like me nor the prince at all. How could such a lie pass? He must have forgiven her preposterous idea, for this was a few years ago after the boy was born, before he gave my power as Wang Fei to her still. No matter what happened between them then and what happened now, I really didn't care a bit. I was a vessel. The emotions I should have had were dried up, poured into a kiln and shaped to be useless. I couldn't even love the piece of imperial flesh in my stomach. My heart no longer beat for anything but for the sake of keeping me alive, even for my paternal family. If they sensed that things were not right with me, there was nothing that they could do. Father had retired, forced out of his position due some scheme or other. I couldn't say, but at least he kept his life. Mother was weak, plagued by an illness she could not shake. They could not look after themselves, let alone look after me, who was suffering in an imperial palace. Despite the extra care and attention, with Wang Yi visiting every day, even staying for the midday meal or afternoon tea, and the imperial doctor keeping a close eye as well in order to help me protect the heir, I could not keep the child. I lost him at 5 months. The imperial doctor announced the news, destroying my husband's last hope for me. He looked at me with his hard, gem-like eyes, which seemed to glitter with frost. Before sweeping out of the room, I watched him go unfazed by it. I'd truly had enough now of this farce. I wouldn't accept the blame, Wang Yi. I called out in a dry whisper, believing that he would hear me despite the quietness of my voice. After all, I seldom spoke around him anymore. around anyone in this poisonous palace. He would notice the moment I did. You should think about the moment when everything started to go wrong. What are you saying? He demanded, slightly hoarse of throat. But I did not say anything more, just closed my eyes and pretended to fall unconscious. He was a smart man. Although he had temporarily been blinded by love, I believed his eyes were wide open now, and he would see what he had failed to in the past. And he did. Lao Shi happened to be the one to comfort him that night, declaring boldly that if only she could tear the womb from her stomach and give it to me. After all, it had safely borne at least one child for Wang Yi. Alas, what he asked her, noticing her hesitation. My womb is dry, she wept. I am unable to conceive any more children for you. In fact, all of the women concubines, it seems, share the same fate. What are you implying? His voice turned cold, and though Lao Shi could feel his icy anger, she continued on. Which concubine has given birth in all of these years? Perhaps he hadn't noticed because he had been too busy seeking other merit as a contender for the throne. But even he could not deny that his last-born child was his only son, Feng Shi's son, who was now almost 4 years of age. Otherwise, he could only count 3 daughters amongst his offspring. Wang Fei he accused, but without much heat. Perhaps he doubted my ability or my temperament, or perhaps he was simply hoping it was me rather than the alternative, for he had never given me his heart naturally. Lao Shi denied this otherwise. How would my Xiao Li be born? Her princess had both been conceived and born after I entered the palace. And for 3 years, 7th prince would not be able to deny, while harmony between me, his Wang Fei, and his original 6 concubines was not without discord. I had never once harmed his concubines, nor his 2 daughters. I won't say that I like him, but he has been a good Wang Fei. She added to his self-vexation. He investigated. Lao Shi told me as I weakly breathed in and out, each breath so much more difficult than the last. Lao Shi had come with the excuse of looking after me as I was failing to recover from my last miscarriage and imperial concubine mother's care. In truth, I had simply given up. He investigated and discovered that Feng Shi was originally a person belonging to 2nd prince. 2nd prince had been possibly the most bitter to learn that he would not automatically inherit the title of crown prince after the eldest prince. The empress' son had died. He was the oldest of the remaining brothers, unofficially engaged to be married to General Tao's eldest legitimate daughter. But his imperial father's edict changed all of that. He was married to a small girl of some random official, and General Tao rescinded the agreement, so he could no longer marry his childhood sweetheart. He hated his Wang Fei and despised his imperial father. Unable to even consummate the marriage, he decided not to leave it to fate and end his brother's ambitions himself. While he was truly not responsible for the 3rd Princess Ger's death, the servant who had caused 4th sister-in-law's loss of child and fertility was his, as was the poison that killed 6th sister-in-law and his baby. He even prevented another princess consort from conceiving at all. My husband's palace had not been so easy to penetrate, and in the end, he had to resort to a honey trap. Only, Feng Shi fell in love with Wang Yi and thanks to his affections became increasingly dissatisfied with her lot. She wanted to be Wang Ye's Wang Fei. She wanted to be his only wife. Her children his only heirs, so she framed the little concubine who was said to have taken my first child's life and drugged the little maid, who had once tried to climb into our husband's bed with psychotropic medicines causing her madness, before bribing or coaxing away my servants and letting her loose in my room to cause havoc. As for my 3rd miscarriage, it was a mixture of herbs in the food and in the tonics. Lao Shi informed me apart they are harmless, but when brought together, Feng Shi has been forced to take poisoned wine. Unless Wang Yi remarries, her son will become his heir. So I guess she got something she wanted anyway. Wang Yi won't take the throne, yes. Wang Yi had lost the throne, thanks to Feng Shi and imperial concubine mother. I am dying, and my death is also the death of my husband's ambitions. This was part of the decree. Lao Shi came to tell me all of this, perhaps hoping that I would be comforted when I crossed the Yellow River, that we have been avenged. He also visited me the day I passed away, the heat seeping from my body as his warm hand tried in vain to replace it. I wronged you, I'm so sorry. I felt my lips curve as the last breath escaped me. finding his apology as amusing as it was pointless. You've disgraced your parents, disgraced your grandparents, disgraced all of the ancestors to our family. You've left me with only one option. You will be cast out. Your name will no longer be Chong. You will be forever, and to the end of time, removed from the family records. This family no longer has a Chong Xiaoying. Now get out of my sight. But father, what about the royal engagement with Jun Qinhuang? Is there only one Ger in this family? Xiaomin is near his age, just promote him. I was kicked out of my ancestral home and felt nothing but relief. It had taken some planning and some schemes, but I had ruined my reputation enough that my elders were forced to this stage. To be honest, it hadn't taken much. A few rumors outside that I was not talented nor virtuous, that I was even promiscuous, flirting with the guards of the compound, I think, and a visiting merchant's son. Of course, Xiaomin's mother fanned flames to make these rumors much discrediting in order that her son be able to shine. The line was finally crossed after my uncle's wife accused me of theft of some imperial bestowed trinket or other. Honestly, we were both concubine-born Ger, but as I was the eldest, I had become the one chosen to marry into the imperial family. The betrothal gifts had already been sent, but I had no plans to enter that nest of vipers again. I picked up the cloth bag my sister had put together for me and hidden in a bush by the west wall. I only asked for a couple changes of clothing and my favorite book, but she had snuck in several silver notes, likely all of the savings she had from all of these years. Out of all of my family members, I would miss her the most otherwise. Unlike the family I was raised within in my previous life, I really had no attachment to the Chong family at all. 200 years ago, the emperor had made a decree and all of his outstanding sons were forced to marry Ger, and the first son to have an heir with his legitimate wife would become emperor. It was 8th prince that finally took the throne, for his Wangfei bore him a son some 3 months after my death. We hadn't even known he was pregnant. According to the history books, the new empress bore another prince for his emperor after inauguration. But the emperor decided that there was wisdom to be held in marrying his sons to Ger and allowing the fates to have some hand in becoming crown prince. Whether it was a clever idea or foolish, who can say? Just as there are wise emperors, there are ones that indulge in avarice and ones that are weak. Changing the conditions of who should become crown prince hasn't really affected this, and now the marriage of prince to Ger has become tradition. Those princes that do not wish to play or have no merit to their names will be married to women instead. Hence how I reborn a Ger, became once more engaged to a prince. But in this life I refused the honor. As for my former husband Prince, it is written that he never remarried an official wife. I was ever his only Wangfei. I can't say that I was really moved when I read about this, though. I walked along down the street, thinking that I should really find an inn for the night. It really wasn't safe for a Ger to be walking out so late alone. As I glanced around hoping to recognize my location, a large and fine-looking carriage suddenly pulled to a halt nearby. A servant leapt out of it and was followed by a man. He had a rather square jaw and particularly hard gem-like eyes, which seemed to strangely melt, just slightly appearing as obsidian pools as he stared at me. I felt a shiver involuntarily slide down my spine and took a step back. It's not safe for a young Ger to be on this street alone. His voice called out to me, the familiarity of his tone too frightening. Allow me to take you somewhere safe. I would have refused him if at that moment a few drunken thugs did not appear from an alley several steps ahead. Reluctantly, I allowed myself to be pulled into his carriage and cursed myself a fool. As the incense within began to steal my senses, just before I fell unconscious, I heard him whisper, Wangfei, I won't allow others to harm you in this life, but I can't allow you to leave me either. I'm sorry. I awoke sometime later in an ornate red sedan carried by 8 people into the front gates of Jun Qinhuang's palace. I could only hope that in this life things truly would be different.